Welcome to Trendy Words, the podcast about meaningless, misleading, and nonsense words we use in business marketing and what we can do about them. My name is Andrew, copywriter and in bad need of a cup of tea, and our phrase for this episode is best practices. And I am joined today by my guest, Samar Owais. Hi, Samar.
Hey, Andrew.
Hi. How are you doing?
I am doing good. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, really glad to have you on here. Yeah. I'll share that you came as a bit of a recommendation. I'd asked a very old guest from a previous podcast that I worked on about who they know, who they like their takes on. And
Right.
you were recommended as having some really hot takes about email.
Oh, yes, I do. So I have a lot of email opinions, and most of them go against the grain. And so, like, my unofficial tagline is that I pick email fights and I challenge the status quo of the email marketing world. And I call out email best practices that have no business being called best.
Mm. Right. So for you, this is not just a pet peeve, but something that you ultimately deal with quite often on a regular basis.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So I'm an email marketing strategist for SaaS and e-commerce brands. And when I work with clients, a lot of times they'd be like, well, our emails aren't performing as well as they should. Our onboarding emails aren't working as well. Our email sales is down. And every time I do an audit, the answer is almost always because they're following best practices, right? So they're doing too many sales messaging in their sales emails. The onboarding is all about their software and not what it helps their users do. And so it's a lot of like unlearning that I have to get my client to do. And it starts from like strategy, mapping out the email lifecycle journey, all of that. And then we tie them back to their business goals. And so that's pretty much what I do day in, day out.
I'm really curious to know, what are these best practices that they've gotten into where are they getting mentally stuck?
Okay, so let's do SaaS, right? So when a SaaS company is doing onboarding, they'll be like, oh, we've got like a 14-day free trial and we need to send out onboarding emails, and they will do like two things. Either they'll send out an email every single day, and then towards the end, they're going sending multiple emails, or they'll send a welcome email and then like a trial ending reminder email, right? In both cases, the companies thought that that was all they needed to do, but neither of those companies were thinking about their customer. They were thinking through their lens. They weren't thinking through their customer's lens. And so when it comes to email marketing, I always say it needs to be customer first. So yes, I am working with you, but I will be advocating for your customers. And so best practices from like email sends to email copy to sales messaging to benefits versus features. It's from pretty much like the whole gamut is when things start falling apart. And because it's so many small things that are contributing to low conversions, low sales, they think it's one thing. And I'm like, no, let me do an audit first and let's find out what it actually is. And a lot of times they're blown away by how many low hanging fruits I point out, that if you just fix this, you don't even need to do like an entire overhaul. Like if you just fix this, if you just make your subject lines conversationals rather than like doing do sentence cases rather than what's the word? I think it's title case where they're capitalizing every single word, right? And so it's these small things, and that's why I love doing audits, because it shows my clients, a it's easy to fix your emails. It's not as hard as you think, and the problem isn't as big as you thought it was. And then it also lays the groundwork for like doing the strategy work later down the line.
It sounds a bit like one of the maybe I'm reading into this a bit, that one of the big issues that you're dealing with in there is having to shift the customer's mindset from treating the email as a box ticking exercise. What you were saying about the thinking that this is all that we really need to do, which speaks to treating it sort of like it's a thing that needs to be done, not really putting yourself in the shoes of the customer.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So, my definition of an email done right is sending the right email to the right person at the right time with the right message. And that sounds like a soundbite, but it is shockingly hard to get right, especially if you are sending emails haphazardly, you don't have a plan, you're not following a strategy. And then that's when, like, when you're not doing any of that, is when you turn to best practices because, oh, you have like, it's Monday, you have an email newsletter to send out, and you'd have no idea what you need to do. So you'll go and put together an email with no thought behind it, and then you'll follow best practices. And then, of course, the email is not going to do all that well.
Well, partly because you're the person writing it often feels that they have to do it, not that they have something really worthwhile or valuable to say that week.
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of times it's I may be working an email, but then they'll be like, "Well, we want to send out like 3 emails a week," and I'm like, "What's your reason for doing it? Right? How are you going to provide value in those 3 emails?" And as an email strategist, that is also my job to come up with it. But I want my clients to also think about it in those terms. Right. So it's very common with e-commerce brands. They'll be like, well, just highlight our product. And you'll be like, yeah, but then that gets old really fast. There has to be a reason. And so for e-commerce brands, it's easy. We'll do like content themes. If it's summer, we'll do summer themes. There's like back to school, there's barbecues, there's all of that stuff based on like what kind of products we're trying to sell. For e-commerce, the good thing about for SaaS, the good thing about SaaS is that they have put out a lot of content. But again, the email team works in a silo, the content team works in a silo. It's the strategist's job to connect both, right? So a lot of times a blog post will be published, it'll be shared out on all the socials, and it will be sent out as an email maybe once. And then like a blog post shelf life would be like a week at best, right? But as an email marketer, I know that not everybody's going to see it. I know that a single blog post can be turned into an email series. I know that we can resend it from a different angle just a few weeks later. And so again, it's doing a lot of things in terms of content. And if you think about it from the best practices perspective, they'll be like, well, we put out this piece of content, let's send it out as an email. And that's where like the best practice stops, right? But then what about, you can't just continue producing content all the time. And that's great if you have the resources for it, but then you send out way more emails than you put out blog posts. And so you need more content.
Yeah, it could have proportional. It's sort of, at least there seems to be a lack of intentionality as to
Yes.
how one part of the marketing machine, if we call it that, interacts with others. And I know I feel like I will be uh, touching a bit of a nerve with any other copywriters, basically like, how often do you find that you have to fight just to have a conversation with the customer themselves to find out what they actually want or need?
Yeah, absolutely. So not so much in the SaaS world, quite a lot in the e-commerce world. And so I tend to get around it by doing competitor analysis, diving deep into like their customer reviews, and not just the 5-star reviews. I'll go deep into like 1-star and 2-star reviews. I want to see like what the 3-star reviewers are saying, and then what the 1-stars are saying. Like, what do they hate about our product? Right? Which is like, I need to figure out, is it a misconception? Is it actually true? And then I'll go and see what they love about their competitors. And so it takes me so much longer than it would take just to talk to 10 customers of theirs, right? But it is a trade-off, and I wish it were different. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Sometimes it's a bit of a fight. Like, we don't have the budget, we don't have the time, we don't have the resources. Those are some very common.
Which is a really odd thing to say when what you're really asking for is, I want an hour on a phone call with the
Yeah.
customer to talk to them about why they like you. Doesn't seem like a terribly
Yeah.
big ask,
Yeah.
but good lord, the number of companies for which that is a terrifying proposition.
Like, so many companies treat best practices as like the universal solution that they can apply across the board, right? So somebody will come in and say like, hey, I want to do this. Let's say I want to put out more content. And then, and I'm sorry, I keep going on about content because in a previous life, I was a content writer. So when I pivoted into email, I was just like, okay, there's a lot to do here, which a lot of companies are not doing. And so they'll be putting out like all of this content, podcasts, blog posts, all of that, but then none of it is being seen by your email subscribers. And so it's one of those things that somebody will come in because they have attended like a conference, heard a talk, somebody say on stage that XYZ is a best practice, and they'll come back to their company and say, no, this is what we need to do now, right? But and that's why higher ups love it, because it makes their life easy. They came in with this big idea, and now everybody else is just supposed to follow along. But then when those best practices don't work, that's when their employees' lives becomes miserable, right? Why isn't it working? And then they have to explain why something is not working, which wasn't even their idea in the first place. I sit in a lot of meetings where I see the faces of a company's marketing team, and I can tell what is being suggested is not their idea. And so a lot of times I have to be the bad guy. I have to say, listen, I'm sorry, but this, in my experience, this is not going to work. And it's tough having those conversations, because then you are essentially being the bad guy. But it helps that when you have a reputation in the industry, people tend to listen more. They tend to pay more attention, let's just say, right?
Yeah.
But
Well, yeah.
so I always say, like, my way of getting around like the whole best practices thing is like that's a starting point. If you need a hypothesis, is when you will pick a best practice about what you're trying to do and start from there, right? And then you see whether it's working or not working. Treat it like an experiment, because ultimately it boils down to what your audience responds to. So if an email best practice is, well, send an email at 7 a.m., right? But your audience are moms. They're not opening their inboxes at 7 a.m. because they are busy ushering their kids to school, then going to work themselves, taking care of like a million and one things that they need to take care of during the day, right? An audience of moms typically checks their email after 7 p.m. And so if you send them an email at 7 a.m., your metrics are going to be abysmal. Because even if they saw the email at 7 a.m. and they thought they're going to think, oh, I'm going to come back to this, this looks interesting, by 7 p.m., they've forgotten all about it. And so it's a starting point. And what I always say is that we also need to look at who is deciding what these best practices are, right? And it's really just these industry reports that come out and that say, oh, these are the best practices of, like content, email, XYZ. But then you also have to look at, well, who is doing these industry reports and how are they collecting their data? And it is usually surveys, right? And surveys are just very one dimensional. They have no room for nuances. There's no room for context. And the thing about best practices that always gets my goat is that if best practices are established by industry reports and those industries are deciding what the best practices are based on the data they collect, what they're really reporting on are the averages. And so what they're calling best practices is actually just a collection of tactics that everybody else is using and say that it's working, right? Where's the proof that it's working?
Or it may not even be what other people are doing, because it's an average. It's
Exactly.
just where the number happens to fall in the middle.
Best practices are really just average practices at best. And if everybody is following best practices, they're all going to end up sounding the same. And they'll send the same kind of subject lines in email. Everybody's going to receive the same kind of emails. And then they're going to all receive them at the same time, because some industry reports said that sending emails at 7 a.m. gets them the highest opens, or sending emails on a Tuesday gets them the highest opens, right? But the truth is, best practices are different for everybody. So you could be in the same industry, you could be the same kind of company, but your audience could respond differently to things. And I think when you follow best practices, there's no room for nuances like that.
So, Samar, one of the things that you touched on in the first half was about how best practices might be a good place if you don't know any better, or you're learning something for the first time. But your guidance is that you really should, as soon as you have your own data, you should be leaving best practices to use that.
Yeah, absolutely. So here's the thing. Every company is sitting on a ton of data. right? But none of them want to look at it. They don't want to go through it. They don't want to sift through it and look at the patterns, all of that. And so they like just resort to best practices because that's easier, right? And so if you are completely averse to not looking at any of the data that you already have, start with a best practice and then see how it performs, right? I am willing to bet that 9 times out of 10, it will not perform, right? And the only reason that I'm leaving 1 point is because I'm not a betting person. But like there's always that one anomaly, right? But anyway, 9 times out of 10, the best practice will not work for you. And so build from there, right? And this is the lazy marketer's way of doing things. Start with a best practice and then study how it does, right? And then based on like whatever metrics you get, then start coming up with ideas of like, well, how to improve it if it's not performing well. Because what you really want to do is study your audience. You need to find out what they respond to, what they don't like, at what times do they respond to, and I'm only speaking from an email perspective, by the way, and things like that. So the better way to do it, I feel, is you need to add 2 words to the phrase best practices, and it is for us. So, best practices for us or our company, right? And then you build out that document. Before you know it, you will have like almost like an email playbook of like things your audience responds best to. So it could be like, hey, our audience responds best to like emails after 7 p.m. They respond best to like short conversational subject lines. And every time we send out like salesy subject lines, they always get low opens, lower clicks, XYZ, right? Our audience loves emojis or hates emojis. They hate long emails. They hate salesy messaging. And our audience are millennials, so references to Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings go really over really, really well, right? Or, hey, our audience has no idea who Billie Eilish is, so let's not use her in GIFs. These are all nuances that you will know once you start studying what your audience responds to.
Mm. And so, in the world of email, what sources of information would you advise to a listener to begin looking at when you're just starting out, when you've done your best practices and you're trying to measure and listen?
Okay, so the starting point is going to be open rates. But again, open rates are no longer as reliable considering all the changes that the email marketing world has gone through in the last few years. But it's still indicative of a pattern, right? So typically, if you are looking at open rates, just reduce, if you're getting like 30-40%, reduce that rate by like 10 to 15%, because a big chunk of those emails will be marked open by the email platform that they're being sent to automatically, right? But then the bigger thing is click rates and click to open rates, right? And those will tell you like what works. And so start by that. But then my favorite way of figuring out how an email has landed is if we get replies to it. So, and that's really something we should all be focusing on, is building that connection with our email subscribers, with our customers, with our audience, and getting them to start engage in a conversation with us. Because email at its heart is a communications tool before it's a marketing tool. And so you could have hundreds of thousands of subscribers, but the person reading your email on the other end is just one person. Whether you're a B2B company, whether you're a B2C company, it does not matter. There's a human being on the other end of the screen, right? So talk to them like a normal person, not like a shouty salesperson. It's just like you are telling your friend about a sale, or you're telling your friend about a tool or a festival, right? And so treat it like that, and then just build out that playbook. And again, it's a living document. It needs to be a living document. So, and I'll give an example of like my own newsletter. When I started it, for the first 2 to 3 years, I would get the best engagement if I send that email around between 10 to 11 a.m. New York time and on a Wednesday, right? But for the past year, I've been noticing that there's been a downward trend. Emails, when I send out emails on any other day, will get me more responses, and Wednesdays have become the lowest response days. And so I'm now realizing that my playbook needs to change. And so I'm experimenting. And that's the thing. Maybe the instead of best practices, replace that word with experimentation, right? There's no right or wrong answers in email marketing until like you've tested it out or you've tried it out and see how it performs or lands with your audience.
Mm. And I think that the lesson in there is that best practices are often used as a way of, or people fool themselves into thinking that it's a sort of a linear relationship between getting from here to getting to here. And as you're pointing out here, the reality is, especially in marketing, is it's almost never linear. It's complex, it's chaotic, and it changes very regularly.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you could have somebody who has not bought from you for like 6 months, right? But then your emails and subject lines start resonating with them, and all of a sudden they're curious about you again. They're enjoying your emails, and you're on their radar again. Or you could have like a seasonal shopper, right? Who just buys from you during the holiday season when they have to buy gifts for like their entire family and friends. And so, again, this is where data is important. If you're just following best practices, you would mark them as like unengaged or like a lapsed customer because they haven't bought from you in like whatever the best practice is, like 6+ months, right? If somebody hasn't bought from you from 6+ months, most brands will say like send them an offer to get them back to buy again. But if you've noticed that they only buy once a year and that price point that they purchase at is at like more than $2,000, why do you want to bug them? When you know they'll be buying at the end of the year, that's when you make your offer to them. Or when you start like, showing up in their inbox more prominently.
Mm. And it speaks to the fact that I always like to think that like audience segmentation is something that should be a best practice, but rarely do you actually see it
Oh
get
my God.
exercised because it takes a lot of work that can't be shortcut by just doing recommendations that I don't know, that a Gartner guide recommended that you do.
Yep, absolutely. So when in doubt, most brands will default to sending an email to everybody on their list,
Mm.
right? And the idea is, well, the more people that see it, the more chances of a sale or a conversion. But that's typically not, that's one best practice I want people to follow. Like do proper segmentation. Let's just say that.
Yeah, and certainly, like if I think about my own inbox of like the thousands of yeah, tech and software emails that I get, most of them are only ever if there's any click option. It's always I want to buy or consult right now.
Yep.
And the problem with that is that I can't interact with that because most of the time I'm not going to. So I probably look incredibly disengaged, even if I like the company, because you don't give me any options to interact or give feedback other than to get into the sales pipeline.
Yeah, that's so true. That is so true, especially if you're not a user or a customer yet, right? That's all the messaging that we're getting. Whereas, like, hey, let's send out a fun email that's gamifying the content a little bit, right? Like, hey, which of these two ads do you like best? If you're an apparel company, which of these two shirts go best with like this pant? And so if you ask a yes or no question, if you give them one option, it's always a yes or no. If you give them two options, it's a this or a that. And so that's one of my favorite email tips for when somebody needs to increase their email engagement and isn't sure how to do it.
Right. I think that's a great tip, and it's usually easy. And if somebody is even remotely engaged, you've lowered the threshold for getting like
Absolutely.
really meaningful direct feedback. And again, moving away from the best practice to gathering the data and learning what works, as you say, for you right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. As well, I feel like one of the other things that I wanted to ask you about was that how do you deal with people that come to you that use best practice as a way of attempting to sort of shield themselves? Because I know that there's an awful lot of this happens in the tech world of using best practice as essentially a way of covering themselves. or because it's what the executive expects them to do, and now they have to essentially win an argument over of doing it thoroughly based on information that you actually have rather than what is essentially a heuristic, a
Yeah.
pattern. Yeah.
So my favorite way of telling them is that you need to work with a strategist. Bring an outside expert who can tell the C-suite that it's not your emails, it's the decisions that you're making that are affecting the emails, right? Or your marketing. And your team can only do so much. Or just do an audit. Just do an audit and divide that your report with like low hanging fruit, easy to implement, big impact, or like medium effort, low impact, medium effort, high impact, and then just like it's like I always mark my reports by like level of impact and level of effort. So low impact, high effort are the low hanging fruits, right? And so it's easier if you can also give them examples like, hey, if we can just do this, like there are projections that we can raise our like metrics by X amount, and if we can do that, and it's just like getting that one tiny win basically, and then that opens the door for like the other win if you can't bring in strategists that the C-suite will listen to, right? And this is where like working with the right strategist is also so important, because the C-suite also needs to believe in the person you're bringing in.
Right. And they need to be just as much of a participant as the marketing
Yeah,
manager and anybody else that's
absolutely,
involved in the marketing and the presentation of the business.
for sure.
Samar, if people wanted to find out more about you or get in contact with you, how do they find you?
Okay, so the best way to get in touch with me is through LinkedIn. Just search for Samar Owais and you will find me, because I am pretty much, I think, the only one there with that name. If you like email fights, I pick them every week. Sign up for them at emailsdoneright.com and you will reserve your front row seat to the next fight. And yeah, that's pretty much where I hang out. My newsletter and LinkedIn and my web. Yeah, that's it.
Great. Thank you very much, Samar. And thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this podcast, please feel free to drop a comment, a like, or a subscribe. I would really appreciate it. And that's important feedback for me. If you want to get in touch with me directly, you can also find me on LinkedIn at AG Monroe. You can also send me an email at andrew@andrewmonroe.com. Thanks very much and see you in the next episode. Bye.